But first, it's a day where it seems the West really is falling. Attacked from outside, crumbling from inside. Wars from the outside, white-anting inside, and now one of the worst mass shootings in US history. In fact, it was spooky today hearing Prime Minister Anthony Albanese over at the White House with the president of our most critical ally read out a poem that's actually been in my mind, even though I doubt he understood how right it was for our times.
The familiar words of William Butler Yeats. Things fall apart, the centre cannot hold.
Things fall apart, and at about exactly that time in Lewiston, Maine, US state, a gunman with an AR-15 style rifle, apparently with laser optics, went on a shooting spree at a bowling alley in a bar and shot dead at least 22 people.
At approximately 6:56 this evening, a couple of shooting incidents occurred here with multiple casualties in the city of Lewiston. And police are currently searching for a Robert R. Card, 4/4 of 1983 of Bowdoin. Card is considered armed and dangerous.
The shooter is still at large as we speak and is being suspected of being this man, twice divorced Robert Card, a trained firearms expert with the US Army Reserve who spent a couple of weeks this year in a mental hospital after saying he'd been hearing voices and threatened to shoot up a military base. I mean, you've got to ask, how does a guy like that slip through the cracks? How is he left with weapons? Things fall apart. Now, there's no point going on about Americans' gun laws. It's so boring now because they won't change. It's not just the amendment, but there's no will. The more dangerous the US seems, the more people will want guns to protect themselves. But this is going to send a message to China and to Russia and another American enemy, Iran, that here it is more evidence of something they've been telling themselves for years now. America is fractured. It is divided. It's getting weaker. It's losing its moral fibre, like much of the rest of the free world. In fact, one of the 7 men who run China now, one of the 7 on its ruling Politburo, even wrote a book about this called America Against America. And that is why China these days dares to be so aggressive. It thinks America's weak. Now, it's true that US President Joe Biden today did tell Albanese at a big dinner for him at the White House that, by golly, we're together in an alliance to defend our values from people like that.
We must continue to advance freedom, continue to defend the values of great democracies, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, and freedom from fear. Freedom from fear. Meanwhile, somewhere behind him, bang, 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 bang. And then externally, there's the wars. The enemies of freedom, Russia, Iran, China, have started or funded 2 wars now. An invasion of Ukraine, now this war against Israel that was launched by the Hamas terror regime of Gaza. And China is now considering a 3rd one as well, invading Taiwan, while the US is still led by presidents so old and so clearly in decline, fading, weak. Things fall apart. But it's not just in the US, which we count on to defend us, since our army is so tiny and badly equipped. I want to say something about the Albanese government as well. In this war for freedom, our government is also faltering. And that's particularly now after that unbelievably brutal Hamas attack in Israel, killing 1,400 Israelis in such gruesome ways. And it needs saying particularly today, because today Foreign Minister Penny Wong said she's going to give about $15 million of your money to help the people of Gaza. And that's on top of $10 million she's already promised. And it's for food and water and sanitation and medical supplies. But I've got to ask why? Why now? And why give $25 million of your money to the people of Gaza without conditions? Why isn't Wong saying to Hamas, which rules Gaza and committed these atrocities and has more than 200 people still held hostage under the city, yes, we will give you, your people, all this help and even more, but only after you release every one of the more than 200 hostages you took, many of them women and children, even toddlers. Free them,
For their sake and for the sake of the Palestinians you rule, for the 25 million that we will give you. And why not? Why shouldn't we ask that? Why should we care more about the Palestinians of Gaza than their own government? Why should we be taking the pressure off Hamas to release hostages, to stop firing rockets at Israel, and to, how about encourage them to start giving their own people the food and the water, and how about an economy and peace that they deserve? Every dollar we give right now for food and water is a dollar that Hamas does not have to spend itself on those things. That frees up money that it then can spend on even more rockets and guns. It's fired, 10,000 rockets at Israel already. Look, we already have aid groups, right, wanting to bring fuel to Gaza as well, after they accused Hamas of stealing earlier supplies from aid groups, petrol that was meant for civilians and that's been stored in these massive fuel tanks, says Israel. Now, we're told, why take this hard line against the poor civilians? All right, Hamas is stealing this stuff and blah, blah, and firing rockets and all. But Hamas doesn't represent the poor Palestinians of Gaza. And we got to help them. Except that's not quite true, is it? Because the people of Gaza actually voted for Hamas in their one and only election 17 years ago. All right, 17 years ago, but most opinion polls now are showing that most of them still support Hamas fighting Israel. None have marched for peace in this war. So, why are we now protecting them from some of the consequences of Hamas deliberately starting this war by massacring Jews? And you might be wondering, why doesn't then the Albanese government demand something in exchange for this $25 million that we're giving? Release the hostages. Who with a heart could object? And put the heat on Hamas to show that it really does care about its civilians. Put the heat on Hamas and not always on Israel. Let me tell you something about that. This crumbling, this thing's falling apart. One thing our insanely high immigration intake has done, and this is going to explain maybe why the Albanese government isn't getting so tough on Hamas. One thing it has done is bring in more Muslims to Australia in just 5 years, between 2016 and 2021. More Muslims brought in than there are Jews in this entire country. Huge numbers. In fact, there are about 8 times more Muslims here than Jews now. More than 800,000. And we have not heard a single Muslim organisation condemn Hamas for attacking Israel, committing those atrocities. Not one. And this is a problem. Or Labor might think there's an electoral opportunity here because most Muslims are in Labor seats. The seat of Watson, for instance, in Western Sydney, that's held by Labor's Workplace Relations Minister, Tony Burke. 25% of voters there are Muslim. In nearby Blaxland, held by Education Minister Jason Clare, stunning 32% of voters there are Muslim. In Laylaw, Victoria, Labor held 15%. I mean, the Muslim vote is very important to Labor. And particularly now with the Greens going all out against Israel, Labor's got to protect this left wing from a Greens attack. And it's important for Labor at the council level too, this Muslim vote. This is Bilal El-Hayek, Mayor of the Canterbury Bankstown Council, the Sydney Council that's just decided to fly the Palestinian flag during this war in support of people led by the world's worst terrorist group. There's got to be a law against this, doesn't there? So no, this Albanese government isn't going to go hard in support of Israel. You've seen that, aren't you? In fact, it's doing the very barest minimum. The Prime Minister, for instance, hasn't even corrected the false impression he gave last week that Israel bombed the hospital in Gaza deliberately, when in fact it was a Palestinian rocket which misfired and hit the car park. Things fall apart, particularly in the West, which has run a recklessly huge immigration program that now is Labor dancing to the tune of a Muslim vote that it thinks is hostile to the only democracy in the Middle East and to our strongest friend in the Middle East. And now there's Albanese off to visit the Chinese dictator now. Notice how it's also gone quieter on China? So forgive me if I end by quoting the rest of that verse, not just the line that Albanese rattled off to impress Joe Biden, not understanding what it meant. Things fall apart. The centre will not hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity.